Welcome to the Jiu-Jitsu Oracle's review of day 2 of the Craig Jones Invitational. But while chatting about matches that have happened, we're going to project forward and talk about our future hopes coming out of the event, what we want to see happen, what we liked, what we didn't like as much. I'm Ross. I'm joined as always by Callum. We'll kick it off by talking about the under 80 kilogram final, which was Kade Ruotolo against Levi Jones-Leary, a match won by Kade, a match that has got a bit of controversy attached to it because some people don't agree with the scoring and who won. So Callum, first off, why don't you give some thoughts on the match, please?
It was an amazing match, big stylistic clash. It was cool to see Kade get the chance to avenge his brother Ty, who Levi beat earlier in the tournament. I think when it comes to judging who won the match, I think there's so much conversation about it because of the prize. You know, like Felipe versus Nicky, obviously you feel bad for Felipe missing out on winning the million, but at the end of the day he got dominated and submitted. Levi, on the other hand, came so close, and when you're so close in a match and there's no second place prize, you're losing out on 1 million in that close of a match. I think it's very natural for people to feel bad for that person and be more vocal perhaps if they thought that that person did enough to win the match. I think that plays into it as well. As far as who actually won the match, I've only watched the match once. There was obviously a lot of jiu-jitsu to get through at the weekend, so there's not been any matches yet that I've had the chance to go back and watch. And I think when you're watching these kind of events live, you're more watching it as a fan rather than an analyst. If you're going back and watching it, you're maybe trying to pick up techniques or analyze who won, but I was very much just sitting back, enjoyed watching it as a fan. So I've heard arguments both sides. I think I would need to go back and watch the match again to decide, but I do think just off of what I watch, you can make arguments for either way. And I think it comes down to a bit of a philosophical debate on like interpreting the rules and the judging and what you're going to deem as initiating action and such things to kind of judge who won the match. But overall, like, amazing match. Good to see that nice stylistic clash between classic guard player and passer.
I think when it comes to judging decisions in combat sports, if it's a daylight robbery, you're absolutely entitled to kick up a fuss about it, and that is something we've seen happen now and again in boxing and MMA, etc. If it's a close match and the judging goes one way or the other, I think you have to accept that that can happen. So I don't think it was a clear robbery for Levi. If people want to tell me that they think Levi won, and these are the reasons as to why they think that happened, and if you do, get into the comments, that's fine. But I don't think you can construct a case that Levi definitely should have won and the money was taken from him by poor judging. I'll say this, that it's the first time the rule set has been used, and probably the guys that knew the most about the rule set were the judges. So the fans, we're still getting used to how it works. The judges, they'd obviously been prepped in how to score the matches. And I think the final was like, from what I remember, and like you, Callum, we've only seen it once, but I think ultimately, like, the judges all kind of agreed through the final as to like the final outcome. Levi got the first round. I think the second round was split, and then Kade was given the last 3. Now, when I'm remembering that match, I think that's fair. I think Levi was able earlier to cause Kade more disruption, and he was a bit stickier. Levi's more of a counter fighter in this regard because he's playing guard, he's waiting for the pressure to come forward from the top player, and then he's looking to react against that. And I think he did really, really well early on doing that. But as the match wore on, I think, like, while Kade wasn't doing like a great amount of damage to Levi's guard, as it were, and looking like he was really good at pass, I don't think Levi was quite getting the same kind of action off balancing Kade, asking Kade questions. And I think ultimately, like when Levi was getting to potential good positions, for example, like Kade being quite happy to stand with his back to Levi so he could kind of like try and backflip over into north-south. It was Kade who put himself there, and then Kade who then created action out of that scenario to try and move somewhere else. So I can kind of see why the judges were favouring him for initiating action, and I think ultimately that's what the match came down to. What do you think, Callum?
Yeah, again, it does come down to interpretation of the judging. I would agree that from an onlooker's perspective, it very much looks like Kade was leading the dance. Whether that to you correlates to initiating action, that's like one thing. But yeah, you are right in saying the judges have prepared for this for a few months, so they've probably got the best interpretation of the rules. However, like I said, for the day one, it seemed to me that the judging was actually not how they said it was going to be. So it seemed to me that like submission attempts and positional control actually scored the highest, and then if those two things were equal and nothing much happened, then they would go to who was initiating more action. It seems that was the way they were doing it and not the other way around. Like they said, initiating action was going to be number one, which didn't make much sense to me, but it seemed like it was the other way around. I think, like, let's just say, for example, Levi was pushing the pace and initiating action one whole round. If Kade passed his guard in that round, I guarantee the rest would have gave that round to him, regardless of if Levi was pushing the action, which is not what they said it was about. So, yeah, still a bit of confusion around the judging, but overall, I think all the decisions, for the most part, went to the right people. There's none that I was, like, outraged about. I think the judging was good, even though it was potentially a bit confusing. But again, it's their first event. We'll get more clarity on that, and there may be some adjustments in the future. But yeah, no complaints really about the judging, even if you feel a certain way about it. I don't think you can say anything was a robbery, like you say.
I think Kade was a worthy winner overall, particularly after coming through arguably the best match we've seen in grappling, certainly the best match of the weekend, where he beat Andrew Tackett in the semi-finals. How do you feel about our bracket prediction retrospectively?
I mean, we got 3 out of the 4. So we put 2 people in S tier, which was both the Ruotolos, and then in A tier we had Hulk and we had Andrew. So obviously we made a bunch of wrong predictions throughout the weekend. There was a bunch of upsets that nobody could have predicted, which is obviously always like the best thing about watching ADCC. So happy about that, even though some of our predictions were wrong. But 3 out of 4 to make it to the semi-final isn't bad. Ty got injured with the match with Levi, so who knows how that match would have went otherwise, but great job from Levi as well. So yeah, I think we did an all right job, but overall the bracket turned out great. I think that match with Andrew and Kade was amazing, and I said this, I don't know if I did say this on after day one or not, but it was what I was thinking anyway, even at that point, that if I was to try present jiu-jitsu to someone that hadn't watched it before, and I was to try get them on board with it, this would be what I showed them, and in particular probably that match. I think even if you have no clue what jiu-jitsu is, just a spectacle of what happened, like, most people would enjoy watching that, even if they didn't really have a clue what was going on.
What are you hoping for going forward now, now that we've seen how that bracket played out?
Yeah, so in general, my ideal scenario coming out of this weekend, obviously, has been a crazy build-up. We've had the rivalry between the two promotions, which I think has done a lot to kind of push eyes towards the sport. But I think coming out of this, the best case scenario would be CJI continues on a yearly basis and ADCC continues on a bi-yearly basis, and CJI has put enough pressure on ADCC to up the prize money and the show money for their athletes, so they get paid a bit more. Craig's initial goal was realised, and because of that, Craig decides that he's going to do his CJI at a different time to ADCC. So every CJI, every ADCC, we get the best grapplers in the world doing both events. So we see the likes of Mika and Kainen coming over and doing CJI, and we see the likes of the Ruotolos and Nick Rodriguez going back and doing ADCC. You know, ADCC is the one event that every grappler gets out of bed for. We legit see the best guys in the world, and obviously we saw some disruption to that. But if we could get back to ADCC being that, and then also have CJI to watch every year as well, that's like amazing for the fans. If they're getting paid at CJI and they're getting paid more at ADCC, that's amazing for the athletes as well. So I think that would be the best case scenario. Then also there's going to be a lot of opportunity for Superfight shows like Who's Number One and Polaris to put together some great matches. So obviously we're going to want to see a rematch with Kade and Andrew. We're going to want to see the likes of Mika versus Kade again. Those two guys won their respective divisions. Obviously we've got the Gordon, Nicky Rod match that we're going to want to see. So I think there's a lot of matches, whether it's like rematches within CGI or CGI versus ADCC winners that we're going to want to see. And I think the athletes as well will be able to demand a pretty decent payday for themselves in those matches. So I think all that culminating would be the ideal scenario from the fans and athletes' perspective coming out of this.
Okay, let's break that down into a couple of chunks, if we can. So, first of all, I agree that these guys should make good money going forward for some of these matches. So, I would like to see a rematch between Kade and Andrew. I think everyone would. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. Except for the one hater in our last video that was trying to tell us that Andrew Take was boring and bad at jiu-jitsu, so he doesn't want to see it, but he was voted the most exciting fighter, so I think he's alone in that view.
Okay, and then I would like to see Levi against Kade in a rematch, and I would like to see Levi against Andrew.
100%, yeah. Seeing how easily Andrew dealt with the guards of Nicky, Ryan and Owen, I don't think you'll have as easy a time with Levi, but yeah, I think that's a very exciting prospect for that match. Okay,
and is there any other people in that weight category you would like to see? So obviously Mika won under 77 at the ADCC, so him playing against some of these top guys in the under 80 bracket against from CJI would be great, but more so in the CGI guys, do you think there's anyone you would like to see again in the mix, doing a couple of super fights after?
Yeah, I'd like to see Joseph Chen in that mix. I think he was doing really well in the Hulk match. A bit unlucky to get caught with that submission. I would have liked to see how he would have done in the mix. Obviously, would have been a rematch against Levi if they faced in the semi-finals. He did quite well against Ty, so seeing him in the mix, obviously he's got that history with Andrew Tackett as well, so seeing him in the mix for sure. Roberto, if he can really work on his leg lock defense, I would like to see him in the mix with that as well. Dante got put out first round in ADCC, but then went on to beat two champions, Mika and Badoni back to back, and he submitted Mika as well, so I'd like to see him in that mix as well. There's so much potential for matches, and those are just some of the few names, but those guys for sure, just like any sort of exchange of those guys and potential matches, I think would be great to see.
Okay, and here's a question, because we analyse the jiu-jitsu as well as the promotions. If any guys that we saw from under 80 could add things to their game, who would you suggest could add something to their game and that would really help them going forward in these matches that we're now hoping will take place?
Yeah, so with Levi first, I'd like to say I think it's cool that he's doing what he does and he's managing to do that at that high level. I think people get quite caught up with being like, oh, this is the thing, like if you're not doing this, like you're not got the ideal for the current grappling game, and definitely some styles can be favourable at certain times, but I think at the end of the day, as long as you're like the best in the world at like something that works and has worked in the past, you can implement that at any time, I believe. And I think Levi's showing that. He's clearly the best in the world at what he does. That Nogi Bolo game might have the best guard retention in Nogi, definitely up there. Don't remember him getting his guard passed since transition to Nogi. So he's obviously the best in the world at what he does. I think adding on to his game would probably be finishing some of the sweeps with wrestle ups. I remember there was a Ty or Kade that he had the single leg shelved up at his trap, and like you don't need to be the most skilled wrestler, I think, to finish that. If he just ran him down and booted his leg, he would have sent him flying. And even if he didn't retain top position, like that's going to score big with the judges. And then as well, like his passing is obviously very good. We saw a glimpse of that against Kade, but as well as just having good passing, just keeping someone on their back. And the thing is style of passing is probably going to be quite easy to do that, like kind of tripod style where you're constantly leaning into them. So potentially adding in some positional rounds where people are trying to stand up in him. So when he does finish his sweeps, he can keep people down on their back and he can work to pass their guard. So like amazing jiu-jitsu, the best in the world at what he does, but I think just to round out his game, some like wrestling up and then retaining top position and keeping people down will do a lot for Levi, in my opinion.
Yeah. And can I suggest I would like to see a big sub-threat added to the game of Andrew Tackett?
Yeah, I think that's fair as well. A complete like demonstration on masterclass of his passing and pinning in those first couple of matches, but I think the sub-threat was probably where he missed out with Kade the most. I think they had amazing wrestling exchanges and scrambles. It was just in some of those exchanges Kade managed to snatch some sort of submission, and obviously Andrew's got amazing submission defense, especially from the front headlock position. But yeah, some of his own submission threats, and obviously he will have some amazing submissions in his bag. He's very good from the back, but he's kind of in that category with the Ruotolos and Mika that I've talked about before, of just being like so young and having such insane reaction speeds. I think if he was to add in some like flash submissions that he could catch, and he's obviously very athletic and high flying as well, so there's no reason off of the wrestling exchange he couldn't like jump into a dorse or a triangle or whatever, you know. So I think that would be good to add into his game as well.
Yeah, I think on that, we've not really talked about the semi-finals, and they did happen a wee while ago from now. But I think it was just that last exchange with Andrew against Kade that saw Kade pick up the win, where kind of entangled Andrew in a dorse position in the last minute. And I think that was just enough for him to sneak that last round and get the win. And just for Andrew to have a threat like that in his back pocket, that he can entangle someone and maybe not even to get the finish, that'll really add to his game, because pretty much everywhere else he's looked absolutely amazing. And I will say that we've asked people who they thought was the MVP coming out this weekend, and there's been a lot of shout for Andrew, even although he didn't win the title. There's been some shouts for Kade. There's also been a couple of shouts for Kynan for ADCC. That's who you've got, and that's who I've got. And we'll get more into the ADCC chat in our next episode of the Jiu-Jitsu Oracle, but certainly there's a lot of love for Andrew out there. Before we move on to the over 80, just you brought in some of the sort of promotional / business aspects as well. So I'll give a couple of thoughts on that, and people might wonder why I bang on about the sort of business side of these promotions. And one, it's because I've got an interest in it, being a big pro wrestling fan. How can you not? But also, I was a former journalist, and journalistically, I would like to get accurate numbers and pictures as to how these events did. So that can be tough to get, because there's a lot of numbers flying around, you know, views and ticket sales, and there's a lot of pictures flying around where an arena can look full and it can look less full, etc. And I think really, like, the fans deserve to kind of know the truth as to what happened. So I think it's important from a journalistic perspective, and I understand in a promotional battle people are going to try and put themselves over, but ultimately, if you know, there's a saying in journalism, if someone says it's raining and someone else tells you it's dry, it's your job to look out the window and check. So that's what I'm trying to do from that perspective, like get the most accurate information, because I think it's really important for the promotions going forward that they learn what works, learn what didn't work so well, and then make adjustments. And we've had some pushback in our comments section on YouTube that we had some gripes about some things, but I think it's entirely legitimate to air those gripes, because if we don't speak up about it, then who will? And I think it's good for the promotions to hear gripes, and then so they can learn things that maybe they didn't know about, some fan experiences that they didn't know about. Maybe they didn't know that YouTube ads were popping up at strange times on the broadcast. So it's good for them to learn about it. And last point on this going forward is that I think looking at the numbers as well now, it's not about, to me, it's not about who won out of ADCC against CJI. Jiu-Jitsu was the big winner this weekend. Ultimately, D2 of CJI was probably the best grappling event we've seen, so if they want to take that as a win, then that's fair enough. I enjoyed
A1 of CGI, I think.
I enjoyed the ADCC as well. I think ultimately there are things in both events that could be better, and I think it's fair to say that. But I hope going forward now that it doesn't become about ADCC versus CGI, and how CGI isn't judged based on how they do compared to ADCC. It's how do they do compared to their last event, and then it keeps growing and getting bigger, and that both promotions grow and get bigger. And ultimately for the grapplers, like you said, Callum, like having two promotions that guys can bounce between is the ultimate for the athletes. So while Craig initially seemed to be making the point that he would like the athletes to get paid more and that he thinks ADCC should be paying the athletes more, I think ultimately the best position for the athletes is that they have access to more money, and hopefully both promotions continue to offer more money to the athletes, increase their prize spots. Although I don't know if you can get more than $1 million, but certainly more than the 10 grand to show up, that can increase over time. But ultimately, if you have both promotions doing that, that's the best place for the athletes.
I think, like we talked about best case scenario going forward, I think worst case scenario, I don't think this is going to happen, but my nightmare scenario would be if there was like exclusive contracts and we got the questions of like, oh, what if Fedor fought in the UFC, and those questions were never answered. So it's not something I think is going to happen, but that would be like a nightmare scenario and the complete opposite of what I was hoping for.
Yeah, and ultimately with CJI, I would think that it would be best for that promotion to be sustainable from its own income going forward. And that would mean ticket sales, that would mean selling rights to broadcasters, etc., sponsorships. It's been great that Craig's been able to bring the money in for the first time, but we don't know that money is always going to come in. Even if someone says they might put the money in again, we never know that it will definitely happen. Whereas like if the promotion's just like bringing in its own income, then that's a far better sign that it will be sustainable. And that was my kind of like my concern at the start as well, when I'm seeing or taking an interest in how many seats are sold, etc. and stuff, because it's not a great look to potential sponsors if an arena's empty. But I'm not saying it was empty. I think around about 7,000 tickets were sold, which is a decent effort first time. I think what CGI did very, very well was shoot it well, so it looked busy around about the alley, which was great. They brought a screen forward. They obviously didn't use part of the arena, but there was a big screen in front, so they didn't really show that. And then areas up and around the arena were darkened. Like, that's classic strategy to shoot an arena in this type of event if you've only sold a certain amount of tickets. But the fans were also electric. They made a great amount of noise. It looked good. My concern was if you have a lot of empty seats, sometimes it can seem a bit flat. But that definitely wasn't the case of CGI. They put on a great event. They got a good reaction from the crowd. I would just love to see the Thomas and Mack sold out next time if they do it again at that venue.
I think if they do it at a different time than ADCC, and then also coming off the back of most people agreeing this was the best card ever, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to sell out. I think they had a really tough time from the start. The way I put it is like only so many people in the world are going to be willing to travel to Las Vegas and make a whole holiday out of going to a jiu-jitsu event. So if only so many people in the world are willing to do that, and then ADCC's already booked that, those people that were willing to do that have probably already booked their flights, their hotel, already paid for the ADCC ticket. So I think it was always going to be a tough battle for CGI. So I think if they do pick a different date going forward, and all those people can go to that and not have to like think about cancelling their ADCC trip or cancelling their ADCC tickets, I think they're far more likely and will have an easier time selling out an arena.
Yeah, I mean, my view on that is that they picked the date, they picked the times, they picked the athletes. Maybe they didn't have as many athletes that actually get bums on seats as the like athletes that people are willing to tune in on YouTube and watch. Maybe if they had managed to get Marcelo Garcia, they'd have shifted a lot more tickets, because getting the chance to see Marcelo live again in the flesh, if you're able to, would be amazing. Maybe going in Las Vegas as opposed to going in LA, for example, which is like a much bigger city and you've got more people to draw from. They could have done that. I mean, we'll never know how they would have done if they'd ran LA, and it would have been also really tough on the coaches and things like that who've got athletes at both events. But I'm just saying that these things are not. I'm not saying they should definitely have done this or definitely have done that. I just think they're interesting talking points and they'll inform decisions going forward. But I think the point has been made with these events, and now the hope is that going forward, they happen at different times, in particular for the fans, because it was an enjoyable weekend, but it was a very tough weekend to watch. And it would be nicer if it was split across 2 weekends and we could actually like have a bit more time to enjoy the matches. I've also heard ideas that like maybe they should run the event over 3 days. There's absolutely no way there should be an event that's 9 hours long, right? It's like either you have to go over 3 days, or you have to have less competitors, or you do an afternoon session and an evening session. There's options. I'm not saying there's one option that's better than the others. I just think the least good option is doing it over 9 hours.
Yeah, there's stuff they can definitely tweak and that going forward. I had an amazing weekend, but it was kind of like some of my friends are over in Ibiza this weekend, and I'm sure they had a great weekend, but then I'm seeing the photos of them in the airport all asleep and spewing in the toilets and stuff, so it's like it takes its toll on you. So although it was a great weekend, I'm very tired from staying up and watching all the matches. So yeah, there's maybe some things they can tweak with that to make it a bit easier, maybe going over 3 days or whatever. Great time watching all the jiu-jitsu. I'm glad it was all on, but yeah, it was quite tiring watching all.
Okay, but last point on this. Right, I like CJI. I'm glad it's happened, right? But it is possible to like something and also offer critique of it at the same time. And I think on the internet, what can happen is polarization, and people, if you say something that you didn't enjoy at CJI, they're instantly thinking you either hate CJI or you're totally pro EDCC, and vice versa. And it's not like that. It's like what we're hoping for as fans of jiu-jitsu, as practitioners of jiu-jitsu, as people who earn money from jiu-jitsu, is that jiu-jitsu continues to grow and that we get the best events to enjoy coming out of it and the athletes get the best opportunities. So let's go back to the action and touch on the over 80 division, which was won decisively by Nicky Rod, who then, at the end of his final match, when he was being interviewed, said that he would take his $1 million prize, and if Gordon put up $1 million as well, they could have a match for the whole kitty, $2 million. So, first off, what do you think of Nicky Rod's performance across the event? And then secondly, what do you think about his proposal to Gordon?
Yeah, so I said after day one, I had 2 words to describe Nicky Rod. That was locked in. And I think we saw that continue into day 2. No celebration or show of emotion after any of the wins leading up to the final. And then the big kind of celebration, letting his emotions out after winning, which was great to see. Very dominant in every match. I think his first match, there had a couple moments where he went for the takedown and got thrown. He kind of looks like a child just because like Max is such a big guy, but ultimately the rest of that match he was great, and it was cool to see all of his wins coming from the same thing, either taking down towards the back or passing the guard towards the back and finishing with a rear naked choke. I said once we saw after the first day Victor Hugo eliminated, and then the 2 wrestlers, Pat Downey and Daniel Greg Kirklet, were eliminated. I think those two wrestlers had potential to be tough matches for Nicky Rod, and then obviously we knew Victor Hugo would have been a tough match for him because he's 0-3 against Victor Hugo. So once those guys were out of the way, I very much thought it was his $1 million to lose. And he didn't choke, he didn't crumble, he performed well in those last two matches and came away with the money, so well deserved. Very dominant looking against Adam Bradley. His passing looked amazing. And then same thing with Felipe Andrew. Same thing in the final against him. So Felipe looked great the whole tournament as well. His guard was looking great, and the other thing we're kind of wondering, would he be able to give Nicky Rod a challenge in the fact that he's quite willing to play off of his back and play supine and very much pummels his legs, which obviously Nicky Rod's favourite technique is the body lock, so it might be hard for him to get to that, but ultimately he did manage to get to his body lock, passed, took the back, submitted, so just completely clean, solid performance from him from start to finish.
And does the match versus Gordon happen?
It's tough because I've been getting the vibe leading up to ADCC and then watching his performance at ADCC that he might just retire, to be honest. I think we've seen his health deteriorate over the last few years, and like that was the worst, even though he won both matches, definitely the worst we've seen of him as of late. And when you're training, putting yourself through hard camps, training all the time, putting stress on your body, it's going to be difficult to recover from your health being in that state, let alone like giving yourself, you might never recover that. This might just be like a downward spiral of his health. Hopefully not. Hopefully like he gets his health in order and then either returns to grappling or just kind of lives a happy life, not suffering from his health consequences. But you know, I've been getting the vibe that he might retire. If that's not the case, whether he takes that bet or not, we don't know. He would probably want to get into a better swing of things as far as competing and getting back to his normal self before he betted that money. Very bold move on the part of Nicky Rod. Great call out, especially with those $1 million. That just makes it even better. Two of the biggest names in the sport, and then with that money behind it. So that was a pretty epic call out. Bold, like I say, kind of reminded me of the press conference with Floyd and Conor. And Floyd was like, oh, if you're that confident, Conor, put your winning against my win. And Conor was like, yeah, let's do it. And I was like, oh, Conor, I don't know if you want to do that. So it kind of feels like the same situation with, you know, Floyd being the best in his sport and Gordon being the best in his. But, you know, I think looking at Nicky Rod's performances that weekend and looking at Gordon's, I think based on those two versions, I think Nicky Rod has a very, very good shot of beating him. So a lot of question marks over whether that match will happen, whether Gordon will compete again, what he's going to look like, whether he can get his health issues in check. But epic call out from Nicky Rod, very bold. Hopefully we do get that match. But yeah, a lot of things yet to be seen with that, I think.
More chat about Gordon on the next edition of the Jiu-Jitsu Oracle, which will focus more on the ADCC. To wrap up this edition, can we just touch on the Superfights? First, we had Craig Jones against Gabby Garcia. The humour around the match and the match itself is not really for me, but I'm glad that Gabby seems to have come out of it as a total babyface, very popular, and I hope she made good money from doing it. She was a tremendous sport throughout the whole time. So, fair play, Gabby. Anything you want to add on that match itself?
I wasn't looking forward to it the most going into it, but like as an exhibition and just like a bit of fun, I think it was entertaining enough to watch. A lot of people were really looking forward to that one in particular, not so much, but it was a fun spectacle, I think, at least to see. Yeah, some of the comedy, I definitely, looking back at old footage of Hanato Laranja, I think he used to be a lot funnier than he is. I think he's lost a step with that character, maybe being out of character for so long, so I didn't think a lot of that was too funny. But I think, you know, as just like an exhibition, getting to see Craig cycle through some like random fun techniques, it was a fun enough spectacle to watch. And I think with the kind of vibe of CJI being maybe a bit more relaxed and a bit less like taking itself too seriously, I thought it fitted in well with that vibe, and yeah, no complaints about watching that.
And we'll conclude the pod by giving props to the UK's own Fionn Davis, who looked fantastic in her victory over Mackenzie Dern. What do you think of Fionn's performance? Cal.
Yeah, super dominant performance. We're wondering the grappling level of her opponent these days, but she put up as good a fight as she could against like the best female grappler in the world right now. I think the most exciting thing coming out of that is the fact that Adele Fornarino got double gold, the first ever women's double gold at ADCC, and I think that is another huge potential match. You know, Fionn, former ADCC champion, coming over to CJI because she didn't really think it added much to her career, and she was wanting to do the big fight at CJI instead, and now there's another big potential opponent she's got in Adele. And I think Fionn made the point with this that she didn't really see the point in having to face 3 women that were going to be really tough back to back to back and then only get paid $6,000 when she could fight all those women individually on Superfight shows and get paid more money. And I think the potential for payday for both those athletes going forward, if they have a match on who's number one or whatever promotion snaps that up, is huge. So that's very exciting for both of them and for the fans as well.
I think based on their performance at ADCC, I would also like to see Anna Carolina Vieira in a match against Fionn Davies. Anna Carolina looked awesome, taking gold, and I would think that there's now a possibility that we see a women's bracket at the next CJI, perhaps a smaller bracket than 16 people, but definitely would be great to see a woman have the chance to win a big prize pot. Don't know what the prize pots will be. If there's another CGI, it might not be as high as $1 million, but if there's a big amount of money on the line, I think that would be fantastic for women's grappling.
What would your thoughts be about this? So from what we can gather and speculate, it seems like the plan for CGI would be to do it every year instead of every 2 years. We saw in this event that there was no 66 guys entering the under 80, so like it'll be tough to recruit some of those guys over given the size of some of the under 80 athletes. So what do you think about sticking to the 2 divisions to keep the prize money high and as well keep the days relatively short, but maybe doing 1 year as like an under 70 and under 90, then the other year is under 80 and over 80, something like that, to give some of the athletes of different sizes a higher chance to compete and do well at these competitions?
I think these are great ideas. I think anyone watching or listening with opinions should fire into the comments. And I think this discussion is justified to have a podcast all on its own. I think it's great ideas, Callum. How should CJI proceed going forward? Good topic of conversation. So why don't we dive into that in greater depth in a future episode of the Jiu-Jitsu Oracle?